Living alone during this pandemic, I've often felt lonely and isolated, and I'm sure many of you have. It's very easy to be down on the state of the world right now, and I felt exactly the same until I read The Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama. Today, I want to share with you my 5 takeaways from the books and how it helped me change my perspective about this lockdown period. Welcome to 5 Minutes 5 Ideas. I'm your host Samanbeh. The Art of Happiness is a book written by Dalai Lama in collaboration with a psychologist. Dalai Lama was exiled at the age of 24 from his home country of Tibet, and yet he managed to find lots of ways to stay happy. The book distills Buddhist practices in contrast with Western practices to give you some practices that might help you stay happy throughout your entire life. My first takeaway was regarding loneliness and connection. So the psychologist asked the Dalai Lama if he ever gets lonely. And whilst the psychologist was expecting him to say, yes, of course, every now and then it's normal for anyone to be lonely, he was surprised that the Dalai Lama said an outright no. Whenever he thinks about a human being, he always thinks of them from a positive angle, from an angle that he can connect with. And he also attributes his ability to connect with individuals to the fact that he's less apprehensive to them. He lets go of any fear that he might have of being judged upon his actions. And once you let go of that fear and insecurity, it allows you to put your walls down and connect with others on a deeper and a more open level. And the Dalai Lama also highlights that it's important to realize the importance of compassion. You need to realize that compassion is not something childish or sentimental. We always want others to approach us positively. But he mentions that that's the wrong thing to do, because when our expectations are not met, we create a wall between us and the other person that we're expecting to act positively. Instead, we should take the initiative first. If we're proactive in creating those positive connections, then that's what we're gonna get. And this was definitely a good reminder for me during this pandemic period to be the first one to call my friends instead of waiting for them to call me. And given that everyone is at home, this is the perfect time to reconnect. My second takeaway from the book was about facing suffering. This particular chapter in the book starts off with a story. The story is set during the time of the Buddha. A woman by the name of Kissa Gotami goes to the Buddha with a lifeless body of her son, who had recently passed away. And she pleads with the Buddha, please make a medicine that might bring my child back. The Buddha agrees, but on one condition. She had to bring him a handful of mustard seed from a household where no child, parent, spouse, or servant has passed away. So the woman is naturally excited and she goes on her journey to find the handful of mustard seed. After a while, she found many houses that were willing to give her mustard seed, but she failed to find one where death had not occurred. She quickly realized how prevalent suffering is in everyone's life. And with that realization, she gradually let go of her lifeless son's body. The Dalai Lama mentions that in the modern world, so many of us resort to drugs and alcohol to deal with our sufferings. But while this might temporarily dampen the pain, it never really gets rid of that suffering. And soon enough, because of our use of drugs and alcohol, they develop into other physical problems that cause us more harm. So the Dalai Lama suggests that the easiest way to make peace with our suffering is to confront it head on. Whilst that might not be easy, it's the best approach to avoid more pain down the line. Personally, I found this advice simple but effective. We all know what the right thing to do is, but not many of us do it. I personally find writing a very good way to deal with the day-to-day struggles of life. It helps you become more introspective and see how a lot of the things that seem to trouble us are not actually such major issues after all. And I also learned to be proactive in seeking help, instead going down a destructive path. And it's important to understand that you're never alone in facing your suffering, and that's one of the keys to living a happier life. The third takeaway from the book was regarding self-centered suffering. So there's two kinds of suffering in life. One suffering is regarding deaths of family members or someone close to you, which is the type of suffering that you can't really avoid and you have to make peace with. The second type of suffering is due to us hanging on to all the negative things that have ever happened to us. And this is the self-centered type of suffering. One day, a divorced middle-aged man comes into the office of the psychologist. Few minutes into the chat, suddenly the old man starts crying while cursing his ex-wife for cheating behind his back. And understandably, the psychologist starts digging into the issues, thinking that he was recently divorced. But as the session comes to an end, the psychologist asks the man, "How long have you been divorced for?" And the man replies, 17 years. To begin with, what the man experienced was the first type of suffering, which was triggered by his wife cheating on him. That slowly turned into a form of hatred inside the man. He never really let go of that situation. And slowly, it wasn't really the issue that was causing him harm, but it was himself. Another story I heard regarding this concept of self-centered suffering was from a Hindu priest who was dissecting the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. And that's another book I'll definitely recommend if you're interested in finding out about the inner workings of the world we live in. So the priest goes to say that if you've got a coffee table and suddenly there's a stain on the table, you clean the stain straight away. Similarly, if someone says something negative to us, that's like a stain on our mind. But most of us, what we tend to do is instead of wiping away that stain, we let it hang on and we let it accumulate to the point that all we think about are those negative things. And soon enough, our perspective changes to the point that we start personalizing every single negative thing that's happening out there. My big takeaway was that never take anything too personally, and that whenever something happens to you, there are millions of other factors out of your control. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that someone is conspiring to make bad things happen to you. My fourth takeaway from the book was about dealing with anxiety. The human brain is highly receptive to fear and worry, and this is to prevent you from harm in dangerous situations. However, sometimes this anxiety can be out of proportion to the perceived danger, and in most cases that danger is non-existent, and that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Not to mention, anxiety is the most common mental illness in the Western world. When asked about how to deal with anxiety, Dalai Lama said, if the situation or problem is such that it can be remedied, then there's no need to worry about it. Alternatively, if there's no way out, no solution, no possibility of resolution, then there's also no point in being worried about it, because you can't do anything about it anyway. So he mentioned that to overcome anxiety, you need to enforce these ideas over and over again. The psychologist goes on to mention that often he's very anxious when he's not able to help some of his patients. Then the Dalai Lama said that if you're able to help at least 70% of your patients, then you don't have to worry about the 30%. As long as you're doing the best that you can, you have nothing to worry about. And I think that's very applicable to our work lives when we get in a cycle of trying to achieve more and more without stopping to celebrate our victories. My final takeaway from the book was regarding our innate nature for happiness. Looking around the world and seeing the violence and the tensions between countries, it's very easy to conclude that humans are by nature violent. The Dalai Lama has the opposite view. He says that humans by nature are compassionate and gentle. Then why do we see all of this violence around us? That all of the violence we see is a byproduct of the human intellect, or rather a misuse of human intelligence. And according to the words of the Dalai Lama, if we were to combine that intelligence with warmth and compassion, we would be able to find peaceful ways to deal with those conflicts. But that does depend on all of the humans realizing that our innate nature is compassion and happiness. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for future book lessons.